Hello, this is Lynn Wilson, and we're on our fifth lecture honoring the 200th anniversary of Joseph's first vision. I'm excited to share with you some of the historical details from 1827 to 1828 as Joseph receives the golden plates. The overwhelming message to me is that great trials and sacrifices bring forth the blessings, and that faith is only grown through hardship and through real trials. The other thing that comes to mind as we look at this period of history over and over again is that the Lord is so aware of the details of our life and intimately involved that not only is the miracle in the timing, but the miracle is in the details, that we can see God's hands. So let's jump ahead to the timeline of this event and refresh our memories that Alvin has passed away. Alvin, the oldest son of Lucy and Joseph Sr., Joseph's oldest brother, who was the major cheerleader of Joseph receiving the plates and following the direction of the angel, in September 22nd, and then a short 2 months later has died from bilious colic. It sounds to me more like an appendicitis, but it's referred to as bilious colic. And that year, the family stops talking about the plates because it reminded them too much of Alvin, according to Lucy's account. And 2 years later, Joseph meets Emma in the autumn of 25. After he meets up with Moroni in September, he and his father both go south to work as laborers in digging for the silver mine on the hill beside Harmony, Pennsylvania. And that's when Emma is acting as the cook in her father's lodging place, and Emma meets Joseph for the first time. Also that December in 1825 is when the Smith families loses their property. They were able to rent it for the next 5 or 6 years, but it is no longer theirs. We talked last week in 1827 about the elopement of Joseph and Emma as they were visiting the Knights and the Stolls in just across the border from Harmony, up in it's not Bainbridge, Colesville, New York, but they were married then in South Bainbridge. The newlyweds then move up to Palmyra, and they remain there with Joseph's family through most of that year. And Joseph is able to accompany Joseph. Emma is able to accompany Joseph. She is the one who Joseph sees as the right person to bring to the hill as he looks in the seer stone to ask who he should bring. And Moroni gives Joseph the plates, and all the hiding and the persecution go along that year until they finally have to leave and move south to Harmony, Pennsylvania. Joseph's family sends her brother Alvin with a wagon up, and they make that transition. When they arrive in Harmony, they finally are able to start some of the translation, and Joseph has already been writing out some of the characters and been working on it, but they don't really begin the book of Lehi until that winter of 1828, when Alva and Emma begin acting as the scribes for Joseph. In February, Martin Harris comes down and is able to take some of the early translation and inscriptions from the plates to some of the people in the United States who were the most well-known as the classic scholars at Columbia University, and he comes back all the more empowered and ready to translate or act as a scribe as Joseph translates the book of Lehi. And Martin Harris then takes those 116 pages home with him, and we'll hopefully get that far today in our discussion. But after Alvin's death, the family was absolutely devastated. And not only did they stop talking about the plates because Alvin had been so involved in encouraging them, but they were also stopped in their house building. They had to hire a different craftsman to come. Alvin was such a fabulous builder that the quality of building was not equaled by any of the other sons in the family, and they had to hire someone else to come to finish the home, which is another financial burden on the family. And then, of course, they had this spiritual devastation that he had never been baptized. And according to the Bible, you had to be baptized or you would be damned. And it was, even though that may not have been believed by some family members, like Joseph Smith Sr., it was very hard on other family members, and they sought solace elsewhere. It's interesting as you look at Christian history from Eastern Orthodox, Catholicism, Protestantism, the need for baptism or the need for belief was required if you were going to use the Bible as your source of truth. And it's not until the Restoration that exclusivity is abolished. And Joseph says it's not 144,000 that are saved. It's not only those who had the chance to read the Bible. It's not only the chance of those who were baptized. Actually, the Lord's atonement covers all, and everyone will have a chance out of the temptations of this world to learn the truth in the next life if they didn't have the chance in this life. And Joseph's window is opened to a wide expanse, allowing everyone the opportunity. But that is not the thought in 1823 at Joseph's death. And in 1824, as another huge revival comes through the area, the whole family decides they want to go and receive spiritual encouragement and comfort. And even Joseph Sr., which was not his practice, says he's going to come with them. But Joseph Jr. does not want to go with him. And Lucy records in her book, or her memoirs, quote, "I do not wish to prevent you from going to meeting or joining any church you like, or any of the family who desires the like. Only do not ask me to go or do so, for I do not wish to go. But I will take my Bible and go out into the woods and learn more in 2 hours than you could if you were to go to meetings for 2 years. I must be up and going, that I must set apart myself about the things which God has commanded me to do. I know what course I am to pursue, and all will be well." And then Lucy begins adding her own commentary on this, and she continues to write in her memoirs, "It was signified to him," meaning Joseph, "when he should make another effort to obtain the plates, which was September 22nd. But at that time, he did not make this known unto us." So I'm assuming that this revival is in early 1824. But I don't know because we don't have a date on which year this was. And Lucy's records sometimes bounce back and forth between the years. But because the family is not expecting him to go back on September 22nd, I think it's the very next year. But sadly, the family does not understand the ramifications of Moroni's visit, but Joseph does. I'm also really touched by the fact that Joseph is already a large proponent of everyone being able to choose for themselves which religion and which beliefs and what things to take upon themselves. That's really powerful. Lucy continues in her memoirs talking about a prophecy that Joseph just gives shortly after that explanation. He said, "You do not know the wickedness of their hearts." He's referring to those people who are running the revivals or the camp meetings. "And I will say," that he said, "one day give you an example that you may set it down as a prophecy. Now you look at Deacon," and then he mentions the deacon's name, and he goes on and he says, "He looks like a great man now, but as the time will unfold, you will see that he is in this for the money, and that he will have a changed heart, and he will take the money from widows and orphans, and that his desire will be changed, and it will not be to bring about the work of God. It will be about to fill his own pocketbook." And he gives a specific example of somebody that he is going to be robbing money from. And sure enough, Lucy then records that it was fulfilled. Joseph's growth as a prophet and his time studying and learning the scriptures was not only for his benefit, but these little examples of prophecies that were given and things that happened to the family over and over again in these next 2 years as we look at them build and strengthen their faith. And it's by the things that they see that they then can come not only from the reasoning side, but from their own witnesses of the Spirit to believe in their Son and strengthen their testimony to put up with the persecution that is going to come. And one of those things that came very soon, much earlier than they thought, was the loss of their home. So that fall of December 1825, Joseph and Joseph Sr. are down near Harmony, Pennsylvania, digging for Mr. Stoll for hard, cold cash for their money. And they have left Lucy and the youngest children in the care of Hiram, who lives in their old, hardly old, just a decade, log cabin just down the street. Now, we have a documented record that Lucy and Joseph paid the original payment on the farm. So that I think I had mentioned that they rented it from Mr. Jennings for a couple of years, and then they bought the farm. We have documentation of that payment, but it appears that things were not as organized as they are in our generation. And as we look back at history, we have to realize that you don't have easy ways of annually paying your taxes and your payments on the farm on a set date. The taxes were not due on April 15th or whatever. You have a very different situation, and the Smiths had saved money, but the story goes that someone had recorded, according to Richard Bushman, at a tea party of some gathering with some women with Lucy, that someone said to Lucy, "It's a shame that you have to live in a log cabin. You're such a refined, lovely lady. You should be in a nice home." And it appears shortly after that the Smiths used that money that had been set apart to start building this frame house that was much nicer and larger. Now, whether or not that account is accurate, we do have the evidence that the money is no longer available to pay this bill in 1825 when the parties come and knock on their door. Lucy records that she is home ironing with her younger children there in the home when they come and say, "We need the cash right now." And she says, "I'll be happy to get you the cash. My husband is out of town." And this is early 19th century. Women do not have rights to money. They do not have rights to property. They don't have rights to the children. They don't have rights to so many things. And Lucy is completely in the right saying, "I can't deal with this. You'll need to wait until my husband returns." And they say, "We're not going to wait." And he says, "Then it's going to take days for him to get here. We'll have to work with Hiram." And so Lucy sends William, or one of the younger children, over to get Hiram, and the men storm out, and they immediately go to the county or city agent who is in charge of the deeds for the property, and they make up a story to swindle the Smiths. And they tell him that Joseph Sr. and Joseph Jr. have fled the property, and that Hiram is burning the property, not only all the new maple trees, but the fences and all the improvements that they've made on the property, so that when the family loses the property, it will all be gone, and the next owner will have none of the improvements. Well, the poor clerk believes them and gives these fraudulent two men the deed to the house. They pay for it, and they leave. And Lucy and Hiram gather the information and go to a friend who's a Quaker who has doesn't have the cash in hand, but he has a friend who has the cash in hand. And they go in and hear the story that the deed for their 100-acre farm has been sold to someone else. And they are able to convince the clerk of the mistake, and they come up with a plan as they work between both parties that if they can have $1,000 in cash by Saturday, that they can find a third party to buy the farm and allow them to rent it back from him. That's just what happens. But in the meantime, as one of their friends is trying to help them regain their property, they go around to all the neighbors in the Palmyra, Manchester area, and they get statements on the character of the Smith family. And we have 60 people who record how hardworking they are, how upright and honest they are, what kind of citizens they were, and what kind of neighbors they were. And just as a side note, in 10 years down the road, we get a lot of statements about people questioning the Smiths. And yet, before the plates are being translated, before there's a problem, we have a lot of positive statements about the character and the nature of these hardworking family. And those statements are used for Lemuel Durfee, a Quaker friend of their friend, to put down $1,000 by Saturday in hard cold cash or silver coins so that they're able to maintain their property. And the family then rents it from him, and they're able to live in their new, larger home from 1825 to 1829, paying rent until that point when they then move back into their little log cabin down the street, which was then Hiram's property, where Hiram and Jerusha and their new little ones were all living. And Lucy and her youngest 5 and Joseph Sr. move back in until they then go to Kirtland. And this is not a time to throw stones and talk about provident living, and they shouldn't have used the land to buy something they didn't have the money for, and they should have kept saving it. Life was so different in that era. We can learn lots of lessons, but one that I want to take away from this situation is anytime fraudulent activity happens and people are swindled, you can see the mistakes you made and you can learn from your mistakes. But you also need to give credit to the adversary who is working very hard against the Smiths at this time. And he is the source of motivating some of these things against the family. But the family is humbled. They become more meek. They become more dependent upon God for their sustenance. And I feel that all these trials were part of the tutoring that was required to develop the character that the prophet became. And his reliance on the Lord required the sacrifice of all things. Also, I think this move made it easier for Lucy to leave the beautiful home that they had built and go to Kirtland when Joseph called for the family to move than it would have been if they'd been there. But whatever the reason was, in the Lord's grand plan of things, the material stuff is not what matters. His tutoring is far more interested in what's happening in the heart, and the family is able to once again pick up and go. Finally, another September 22nd, and we're back up to now September 22nd, 1827. But why September 22nd? Some of you may know that this happened to fall on high holy days for these years. The Feast of the Tabernacle, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, these feasts of New Year's and Day of Atonement are on different days every year because of the lunar nature of the Jewish calendar. But the Book of Mormon Central has made a wonderful little video clip of why this date was important, and I'd love to share that with you now. You can find the information on it when you get on bookofmormoncentral.org and listen to one of their Know Whys. But here's what they share.
On the night of September 21st and 22nd, 1823, the angel Moroni first appeared to Joseph Smith, telling him that there was a sacred record buried not far from his family's cabin. Then on September 22nd, Joseph went to uncover that ancient book. There he met Moroni again, who told him it was not yet time to retrieve the record, but that he would need to come back on that same exact date each year for the next 4 years. Clearly, September 22nd was no arbitrary day in the eyes of God. Each year it coincided with an important part of the Jewish High Holy Days, which historically celebrated the involvement of God in the lives of His covenant children on earth. The first year, 1823, September 21st and 22nd were the first 2 days of the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles. In 1824, September 22nd was the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the Israelite New Year. In 1825, September 22nd was Yom Kippur, the very Day of Atonement. Then, in 1827, when Joseph was finally allowed to retrieve the plates, it fell exactly on the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. Each of these holidays herald God's covenantal love for His people. No bolder statement could be made on Rosh Hashanah about God's everlasting kingship and covenant with His people than that of His holy angel, delivering another testament of His divine dealings with His children through His risen Son, the Lord Jesus Christ, who had ministered personally, as promised, to the posterity of Lehi. And now you know why.
One of the sweetnesses, I think we need to move on to the next one. That day is well recorded in Lucy's book, in Joseph's canonized section of his history, as well as many other people. Joseph Knight records it. And many people were expecting this to happen. In fact, Joseph Knight happens to come up from Colesville, New York, the 120 miles or so, to visit the Smiths on September 20th. And Lucy is up late preparing for the company and other things that night. And shortly before midnight, she says, Emma comes downstairs in her riding clothes. And Lucy immediately recognizes that they are going to Cumorah. And Joseph comes down, and quietly the two of them slip out of the house and borrow Joseph Knight's wagon to go the 3.5 miles to Cumorah. And Emma is left in the wagon to wait while Joseph goes up the hill. So that it's now just after midnight, and he is meeting Angel Moroni. But it is not just a quick handover. Joseph does not come back for at least 6 to 8 hours. And Emma is left there waiting for him. I don't know the conversation that occurs with Angel Moroni, but I assume that there was much teaching that was given. And the only thing that Joseph shares is that Moroni said, I have protected the plates. When they've been in my care, nothing has happened to them. But now they are in your care. You are going to have to try your absolutely hardest to protect them. And if you do so, the Lord will take care of the rest. And that's exactly what happened. We see God's hand in the tiny, simple things and miracles sprinkled through their lives, but they are having to try their absolute hardest to keep those things covered. And interestingly, he does not bring the plates back to the wagon with Emma. He brings back the interpreters, the other things in the wrapped in a linen cloth, but the plates, he finds an old birch log and hollows it out and puts the plates things there and then covers it back up with a bark. I don't know why he couldn't just keep them in the stone box. But this was all part of the learning how to protect and keep these things sacred so that he then was responsible for them. So he comes back home, and in the interim time, Lucy has stopped doing her work, and when Joseph and Emma leave, Lucy begins praying, and she prays the entire night long. She's well aware what Joseph's doing, and she pleads with the Lord that he will be able to open a way that Joseph can bring the plates home. Joseph Sr. comes down for breakfast and says, I'd like to eat with Joseph. Go get Joseph. And Lucy says no. And she covers for Joseph and says, no. Let them sleep in. You eat your own breakfast. Here's Joseph Knight. Have a meal together. Joseph Knight starts looking for his horse. He can't find it. Lucy completely covers for them. He never says Joseph went to go get the plates. And I'm not exactly sure why she doesn't. But she calls little Willie out, and William goes and looks in part of the 100 acres to see if she can find the horse. And while William is out looking for the horse to try to calm down Mr. Knight, who's very concerned about his wagon and horse being missing, in walks Joseph and Emma without the plates. And Lucy says initially she was devastated, but Joseph goes to her and hands her in her hands a little linen cloth with something inside. And Emma Lucy describes it in her writing as 3-cornered diamonds set in glass, and the glass was set in a silver bow, connected with each other in the same way that old-fashioned spectacles are made. So artists have tried to come up with what that meant and what it would have looked like, but these were the Urim and Thummim. Now, Joseph does not always have these with him. Initially, though, he kept them on his person. And when he loses the 116 pages, he has to give them back to Angel Moroni. And from that point on, we learn a lot more about him using the seer stone. But initially, he kept these on him, and he was able to see and protect the plates by looking in this Urim and Thummim, these crystal glasses that were in this shape of triangles. And the plates are not brought home, but he describes them elsewhere as about 6 by 8 inches, about 60 pounds. It's about 15 by 20 centimeters. And they had the appearance of gold. And it, as you know, it made everyone very upset. And we get all the neighbors looking for the plates, and they're having to protect them with all the efforts they have, and he moves them from place to place. It appears that the neighbors initially want to join in on the money-making aspect of them, and that they're in it just because of the gold. And that, though, changes as soon as the translation comes, and people are very upset across the nation. We see records in newspapers and preachers denouncing Joseph because of the content. They call it a golden Bible. And in this era, the Bible was the most important thing to the Christian Protestant world. It was the source of their revelation. It was the source of their authority. We no longer can claim the Pope, so we have to claim authority from the Bible. And it was the source of all truth. The greatest Christian writings at that time are by Charles Hodge and other people who were the professors of different divinity schools, and their writings are very clear that anything we need to learn should come from the Bible. And when Joseph Smith shows up, or Joe Smith and his Mormonites, as they called them, shows up and says there's actually mistakes in the Bible and it's not quite right, and if you really want to have the Word of God, you need to read this book, it was an explosion, and everybody gets upset. And we'll talk about that more as the time unfolds. But I think that the combination of those two things is why Joseph had to start hiding the plates in things like this birch log. And he looks in his Urim and Thummim and he sees that the plates are no longer safe, and he brings them back into the house and puts them inside one of the stones in their hearth. And then he takes them out and hides them in the cooper shop. And, Joseph Sr. was a cooper, and the cooper shop is just down the street or down a different part of their 100 acres. And Joseph pulls up the floor and puts the box where they had been keeping the plates, nails it closed and puts it under the cooper's floor. And another time he puts in the bale of beans. He moves them from place to place. I want to share a little bit with you about the box itself and tell you some of these stories. But the bottom line is Joseph is warned in the Urim and Thummim that the plates are not safe, and the opposition is rising and rising, and he can't really get much work done on the translation because he's spending so much effort trying to protect them. But all of this was for a reason. First of all, again, they had to have the consequences of telling people things that they should not have been told. Some people complain, why didn't Joseph write things down better, and why didn't he tell more people about the first vision? Well, he was told not to tell people. And Lucy records in her memoirs, we only told one trustworthy person about the gold plates. But obviously, the leak came out, and I don't know if a small child would have told a friend or how many other people knew, but the mobs were aware, and it really became a challenge. Going back to the morning of September 22nd, when they're back in their home and Joseph has the plates hidden in this birch log, he tells his mother, I need the wooden chest with a lock. And she says, we don't have one. And he sends over to Hiram, and they get a box that was used for glass. and store them in there. But he wants a nicer box. And so his mother says, go to the furniture maker who's making some of your sister's furniture and tell them we'll pay for it half in cash and half by the produce that we grow in our yard, our farm. And we'll cover a very nice wooden chest with a lock and key. Well, Joseph doesn't have the money, but the Lord, by his miraculous timing and ways, sends someone to the house the very next morning. I assume it is now September 23rd or 24th, who comes to the Smith yard and says, I'm looking for Joseph Smith. There's a widow a few miles away who'd like to hire him to dig a well for her. This will be plenty of money to buy the nicely made wooden box. And so Joseph goes with this young man to dig the well for this widow. And while Joseph is there digging, Lucy hears rumors about someone coming to get the plates. And she's very worried, and she tells Emma, you've got to go find Joseph. And one of the small little miracles of the time is over the last 24 hours, a stray horse has shown up on the Smith property. And William went out and put a rope around the neck, a bridle. That's one of the rules at the time. If you see a stray horse, you have to put a bridle on it and keep it on your property for 24 hours before you can claim it. Or the horse has to stay there for 24 hours. Well, this horse happened to stay there. Emma goes out, and she's a great horsewoman, and knows how to ride, and sprints as fast as she can on this new Shadowfax, and goes to Joseph and finds him in the base of the well and explains the situation to him, and he pulls out the Urim Thummim. He kept the Urim Thummim on him at all times, and so he could check on things, and he tells her that he sees the plates, they are just fine, but he also sees the distraught situation of his mother, and he's happy to go home with Emma and calm things down and move the plates and just be cautious. So the widow is not too keen about this, but she agrees that if he will take her horse and bring it back, he can go for a little while. And that's when they begin moving the plates from place to place, and the mobs become out of control. And all of this is minimal compared to what happens in the future with the mobs, when not only in Kirtland do we find tar and featherings, but Missouri gets completely out of control. And I just want to pause for a minute and have you ponder why, when these good people are about the Lord's work, why do they have so much persecution? And it doesn't take me very long to come up with a long list of what is developed in not only Joseph and Emma's hearts, but in their whole family, and what this persecution did to the neighbors. And by these small and simple things, great things are brought to pass. Everyone becomes so much more dependent upon the Lord. Their humility and their meekness, they are tutored by God in their struggles and their sacrifices. And the Lord is refining them in this process of exactness. They still have the consequences of their behavior. Another thing that I see is any time the Lord has a great work, Satan's opposition flares up in full force. And we see the wickedness of Satan's work in otherwise well-meaning people. But because of the deceptions of men, we get people like Sally Chase coming out of the word work. This girl is, I believe, inspired by the devil and finds a piece of glass, a green piece of glass, and says, I can see where the plates are. I know where they're hidden. And Sally Chase takes the mob around to these different places, and they go into the cooper shop where Joseph has hidden the box underneath the floorboards during the night, and they tear apart the bottom of the cooper shop and pull up the floorboards, crash open this wooden box to find nothing, and Sally convinces them she still knows where they are, but they leave the cooper shop without ever lifting up the flax that was hiding the plates that Joseph had put up in the loft. Sally then takes them to another place and another place. And we can see not only the reality of God's foreknowledge and God's awareness of the details of our lives, but also Satan's and his ability to make life very difficult. But in this tiny little piece of history, from September 22nd, 1827, to December, when Joseph leaves the area, we see God's greater strength and God's greater care. And it's absolutely miraculous and a beautiful thing. Two of the people that become refined during this process are Martin and Lucy Harris. Martin marries his first cousin, the beautiful Lucy, who is 16 years old at the time. But in their first few years of marriage, something happens and she loses a portion of her hearing. I don't know if it's scarlet fever or what it is that attacks her inner ear, but she loses a large portion of her hearing. And in Lucy Mack Smith's memoirs, she kindly says that Lucy Harris had to develop this kind of suspicious nature because she couldn't hear as well. And she was always thinking that when she didn't hear part of the story that she misunderstood and she thought people were trying to swindle her or pull something beside her. And she developed this nature that was not healthy. And in Lucy's record, she says that Joseph and Martin had already developed a relationship, and Martin had shown enough faith that Joseph wants to talk to Martin, especially since the persecution's getting so bad, Joseph wants to move down to Harmony, Pennsylvania, and he wants to tell Martin that he's leaving. So he asks his mom, go get Martin and tell him I've got to talk to him before I leave. And Lucy goes over and knocks on the door, and Lucy Harris is in the home and volunteers her services. And in fact, she says, I know about the plates, and I have $200 at my disposal, and I will be willing to pay for helping this if I can see the plates. And Lucy Mack Smith says, I'm sorry, I'm not here to speak about that. I can't speak for my son. I just know I need to relay a message to your husband. And the two women are frustrated with each other, not taking care of things. But after a while, Lucy is finally able to talk to Martin and says, my son would like to speak to you. And Martin says, I'm trying to get the farm in order so that I can come help Joseph for a full year of travel. Give me a little bit of time. I'll be there on Tuesday. And then Lucy Harris, his wife, says, and I will come with you, and I want to be part of this situation. Well, the amazing thing is in Lucy's Mack Smith's memoirs, she says that when they both come over on Tuesday, that Lucy Harris says, Joseph, I will tell you what I will do. If I can get a witness that you speak the truth, meaning she wants to see the plates, I will believe you and all you say about the matter. And I shall want to do something about the translation. I mean to help you in any way. And she throws down $28 worth of silver to help. And Joseph says, no, we can't take your money. She says, absolutely, I want to help. Well, Joseph and Emma finally take the money, and Lucy Harris leaves very disappointed that she is not allowed to see the plates. And Lucy Harris comes back the next day and tells Lucy Smith, who records in her memoirs, that Lucy Harris said that night a personage appeared to her during the previous night and was told her that as she had disputed the servant of the Lord and said his word was not to be believed, and also had asked him many improper questions, that she had done that which was not right in the sight of God, and that after which he said again, behold, here are the plates. Look upon them and believe. And according to Lucy's memoirs, Lucy Harris describes the plates and what they looked like. And she again volunteers to help. But something happens, and she changes, and she begins to work against the church, just like so many people who have had a witness from God, who has seen an angel, who volunteer to help, and then Satan takes control. And whether it's pride or selfishness or a love of money or for whatever reason, they turn against the church. And we see that happening with Lucy Harris. She dies an early death by 1836, I believe the year was. I'm not positive. And their marriage has been broken up by the difference of opinions. She's furious that Martin loses the farm because of the publishing of the plates. She insists on, we'll talk about the 116 pages next week. And after her death, Martin marries Caroline Young, Brigham's family. So it begins with possibly a sincere believer, but without the grounding of strong enough faith, she becomes to attack and destroy the church, as we see so many people now. But after Alvin Hales comes in December up to Palmyra and takes Joseph and Emma down and stays on the wagon, protects the plates all night long. He stays out there and lets Joseph and Emma get a good night's sleep in the tavern. And in the middle of the winter, even, it makes it a little different in upstate New York, what that means to stay outside on the wagon. Has different meanings than it would in other places of the world. When they finally get there, Joseph and Emma move in, and Isaac Hales says, "I would rather my daughter have died than marry you." And Joseph defends himself and says, "I'm sorry, I will no longer dig for any kind of money. I am happy to be a farmer. I am grateful for your invitation to come and buy part of your property. I will try to be a good husband and a good son-in-law." And Isaac says, "Then you let me see the plates and you can stay here with us." And when Joseph says, "I'm sorry, I cannot let you see the plates," Joseph has learned by sad experiences that he has got to obey with exactness. And so they are kicked out of the house, and they build a small little log cabin. But Isaac continues to try to work with them initially and allows them to build, as I mentioned last week, on 13 of the very good acreage, 13 acres of which, or 6 acres of which could be used as agricultural farmland. And they begin farming and preparing the land for the next season when Martin Harris arrives in February. And the little bit of translation that Alvin and Emma have been able to act as scribes for Joseph is taken by Martin so that he can go back east and find the scholars that are at the different Ivy League universities who know how to read ancient languages to validate Joseph's translation. Martin is still questioning, willing to help, but being cautious. He does not want to be swindled. And as the story goes, Martin takes this transcription and a copy of the characters that Joseph has taken from the plates to one of the 5 people in the nation who actually can read ancient languages. Very few people in the United States at this time had been trained in classical languages, and there were 5 who had an international experience, who were fluent in Hebrew and Greek and some of the Semitic Arabic languages. And he takes them to one of them, whose name was Charles Anthon, and he was at Columbia College at that time, to ask if it were a correct translation. Some of the accounts also say he took some to Samuel Mitchell, but the accounts are, not everyone has the same story, so I don't know about that one. His initial plan was to go to multiple people. And the truth of the matter is, even though Charles Anthon was one of these 5 most educated classics scholars in the nation, no one in the nation could read Egyptian at that time. The Rosetta Stone had been discovered in 1824, I believe. I haven't checked that number for a few years. I'm not positive. And there were people in Europe who had cracked it, but that information was not available in the United States yet. No one had published it, and it was not yet part of the curriculum in any of the colleges of divinity that studied the Bible in America. And no one in the world knew what Reformed Egyptian was, especially the form that the Nephites had written the language was. So when Charles Anthon is saying these characters look accurate and I can trust that they are of ancient form and the translation looks good, he really had no idea. He was just going from the best of his knowledge, but he did not know how to read Egyptian. at the time. No one did. No one knew Reformed Egyptian. And that's when he says, you bring me the book and I'll be able to translate it for you. And Martin explains it's sealed. He says, how did the young man get the book? He tells him about the angel. And you know the story. It's written up in the church, in Joseph's history in the Pro Great Price. Dr. Anthon tears up his letter and says, no. So we really don't have evidence of what he said, but we do have Martin's behavior, which I think is stronger than a piece of paper. Martin comes back more convinced than ever, and he is willing to act as a scribe. And he takes a full 2 months off, mid-April to mid-June, and he begins acting as Joseph's scribe, and they record the 116 pages. So the story does not end in a piece of paper, but we end with a committed Martin Harris. The story also, I believe, fulfills the prophecy that we find in Isaiah 29, when the prophet is inspired to record, quote, "The vision of all is become unto you as the words of a book that is sealed, which men delivered the one that is learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he said, I cannot, for it is sealed. And the book is delivered to him that is not learned, saying, Read this, I pray thee. And he saith, I'm not learned. Wherefore the Lord said, For as much as this people draw near to me with their mouth, and when their lips do honor me, but have removed their heart far from me, and their fear toward me is taught by the precepts of men, therefore, behold, I will proceed to do a marvelous work among this people, even a marvelous work and a wonder. And these beautiful words from Isaiah are fulfilled, and the description of the Book of Mormon as a marvelous work and a wonder becomes used by the Lord in Revelations to Joseph in the several verses, several sections of the early Doctrine and Covenants, starting in 1828, 1829, 1830. And we receive the more sure witness from the Holy Ghost that although the learned man cannot read the sealed book, through the power of the Holy Ghost, Joseph is given the gift of a seer, and we have the miraculous translation of the Book of Mormon, which we will start with next week. Thank you for joining us. Marsley, I don't know how to stop it. Do you know how to stop it, Marsley? Oh, good. So you'll have to cut out all that ending. I've been talking for a while.